So good afternoon to everyone on the East Coast, and good morning to everyone else who's joining us for our Alteryx Day webinar. Today, you'll be finding out how you can accelerate your financial data processes with the Alteryx APA platform. My name is Quinn Lin, and I'm the SLUD Account Executive at Data Meaning, and I'll be giving you a quick overview of who we are. Then I'll be handing the ball over to Megan, who will give you a brief overview of Alteryx and their APA platform. After that, Andrew Kim from Data Meaning will also walk through a risk management use case to show you how quickly you can build a workflow in the platform to sample a data set, apply predictive and analytic techniques for model scoring, then generate a Tableau extract for visualization. So just a little bit about us here at Data Meaning. We are a small business technology consultancy with a focus on data analytics and business intelligence. Our headquarters is located in South Florida, but we have remote offices across the country. In addition, we have some offshore teams in Brazil and India. We are a premier Alteryx partner who can provide end-to-end data analytics, advisory, and solutioning. Our services span from strategic planning, creative services, solution architecture and implementation, managed services, and training. We have a diverse set of experiences in a variety of platforms across the data analytics technology stack, which allows us to provide more holistic solutioning from ingesting data from your source systems to then getting the data to your different data personas. In the last couple of years, we've also expanded our capabilities to advising and implementing data platforms and tools in the cloud, like Azure, AWS, and Snowflake. We have worked with commercial and Fortune 500 enterprise customers across a variety of verticals and different business units in their organizations, such as tax, audit, finance, HR, and customer analytics. When we engage with our customers, we're not just helping them solve a technology problem, but we're looking through the lens of solving business problems. We look at the people, process, technology, and data when advising and implementing on the best solutions for your organization. We're always growing our capabilities and staying up to date with the latest and greatest technologies that are moving the needle in digital transformation strategies, like Alteryx. So now I'll hand the ball to Megan to talk a little bit more about Alteryx and their platform.
Thank you, Quinn. Hello, everyone. My name is Megan Bedford. I'm part of the Alteryx public sector team supporting state, local, and education. My family and I were based out of Frisco, Texas, and I'm really excited today to discuss and kind of educate all the folks on the call around why government agencies are using Alteryx to support projects and daily activities. Also, after the presentation, feel free to reach out to myself and the Data Meaning team for additional information, to answer questions, or just learn more about the platform. So for those of you who haven't heard of Alteryx, just a little background on the organization. So we became a public software company back in March 2017. We are supported by key technology and strategic alliance partners. That includes Microsoft, Tableau, AWS, KPMG, and those are just to name a few. Alteryx has over 550 employees, and we have a worldwide presence of over 6,000 customers. So, what is Alteryx? Well, Alteryx is simply a unified software platform that provides data analytics, data science, and process automation across the entire digital transformation continuum. Also, Alteryx brings together business users, citizen analytics, and information consumers to accelerate an organization's outcome. So here at Alteryx, when we talk about analytics, our team truly understands that we need to focus on embedding the human element into the process. So from the folks that have the domain expertise to those who utilize the data on a daily basis and ultimately understand what questions to ask. Essentially, these folks are the most critically important aspect to the analytic process. So when it comes to a digital transformation strategy, that essentially must include data, process, and people for it to be successful. So for instance, something that we can all relate to is COVID-19. So it's clearly a public health challenge, but it's also a data challenge as well. So first is the quality and availability of data when it comes to the lack of testing and the delay in getting results. And then second, it's the variety and scale of data sources, including data related to supply chains, public health, prisons, social distancing, risk of infection, and so on. Now, the Alteryx team is currently helping the state of Ohio with these types of challenges. And the state of Ohio has said to us, they really don't have time to sit here and do real robust ETL work. And that Alteryx is great at connecting to different sources and getting the data ready. And Alteryx has been incredibly easy and helpful resource to expedite the preparation of all the data that's feeding their visualizations and dashboards. So, the alignment of data, process, and people essentially helped the state of Ohio to quickly pivot from identifying duplicate payments to making sense of COVID-19 data. So once again, every organization's strategy must include the convergence of data, process, and people for it to be successful. Now, the Alteryx platform is data agnostic and skill level agnostic. So Alteryx allows you to connect to any data source right from your desktop, from simple flat files like Excel to homegrown and legacy databases like Oracle and IBM, and cloud sources like AWS and Azure. So Alteryx combines these sources to enable you to discover, connect, catalog, cleanse, analyze, govern, and collaborate. Also, you can leverage AI and machine learning to automate, to suggest, to predict, and output to any source that you have. And the platform includes 260 automation building blocks and 160 native input-output connections. We can output to any reporting or visualization tool out there. That's including Tableau, Power BI, Qlik, essentially you name it, and we can connect to it. And there's really no other platform that brings forward this complete analytic process automation vision. Now, while the Alteryx platform supports all aspects of government, from the Department of Health to supply chain management, in today's session, we're going to be focusing on the finance division. So with that in mind, let's briefly touch upon a study done by a CFO indicator report with a focus on automation. So the study shows that 51% of financial teams currently have no automated activities, and 40% of their daily tasks can be automated. Now, fast forward to an agency utilizing the Alteryx platform. Well, with self-service data analytics, your team can improve the quality of reporting to management, to auditors, and to regulators through increased transparency and financial calculation processes, ad hoc requests, or modeling scenarios. And your team will reduce manual reconciliation and enable next-level analytic forecasting and model scoring. And let's not forget reducing risk exposure through more strategic tax, audit, and financial analytics. So now that everyone has some background knowledge on the Alteryx platform, I'm going to pass this over to Andrew Kim, who's our Alteryx expert at Data Meaning, to showcase the capabilities of the platform through a demonstration. Andrew?
Awesome. Yeah, definitely. Thanks for that, Megan and Quinn. I'll go ahead and absolutely share my screen here. Now, as Megan mentioned, we are going to be taking a look at a financial specific use case. Hopefully you guys can see my screen here. Now, before we actually jump into things, just some really quick logistical items to get out of the way. We want the session to be as interactive as possible. So as we're going through the live demo here, if you will, if you look at your actual toolbar in Zoom, you should see a Q&A area. Absolutely. If you guys want to pose some questions or send some questions out to the panelists, if it's a super technical question, I personally can't promise that I'll be able to answer it while we're going through the demo here, but at the very least, you'll be able to get your questions seen. And at the very end here, we can absolutely go ahead and going down the list one by one, answer those questions. If you do have some general comments you want to make or anything of that nature, absolutely. Feel free to use the chat, or you can go ahead and raise your hand. I'll go ahead and monitor those couple of areas here as we go through the session, and hopefully be able to answer some of your guys' most pertinent questions here. Having said that, let me go ahead and set up everything, make sure that I'm able to see everyone. Excellent. So hope you guys are doing are having a fantastic day today. We do have a use case here regarding some credit application data. And more specifically, we're going to be starting off with a data set that looks a bit like this. So we're putting ourselves in the shoes of an analyst who has to determine, based off of various customer profiles, whether or not we should approve that individual or that person for a credit card. As we can see here, we have a bunch of different columns at the very bottom of our screen. We've loaded the data into Alteryx, right? We have education level, whether or not they own or rent their current housing situation. We have various other fields here, and all of these fields essentially just describe that individual and contain values that maybe would be pertinent to making a decision on whether or not that individual should be approved or denied based off of their application details. And the column today that we're going to be mainly focusing on is going to be the is approvable column. This is going to be the most important column. We're going to use this as our indicator of, for example, in the first row with a value of 1, right? A value of 1 means that historically this individual has been approved for a credit card. And a value of 0, of course, is the opposite. We've denied that individual of a credit card. And the overall intent and goal is to be able to take this data, run this through some kind of predictive analytic process within Alteryx, to then be able to generate some kind of statistical model, to then be able to take another data set, that data set containing new applications we have not necessarily ran through this process to approve or deny, and determine whether or not we should essentially approve or deny that new individual, that new application for a credit card. So we're going to split this up into 2 processes. First process is going to be to generate the predictive model. Second process is to create and be able to take in that model and utilize that to make some decisions or to generate some decision-making data here. So taking a look at a very high level, right, based off of the time constraints that we have today, this won't necessarily be an entire course of or an entire degree of statistics here, right? We're going to be mainly taking things very high level. In the grand scheme of things, we're going to be loading in our data, right? We've already done that with our data input here. We're going to run that through some kind of data preparation process, right? Sort of a process that a lot of us have to run through. So this may be something that you guys are familiar with. We will then run that data, that cleaned up or prepared data, through a couple of predictive modeling tools here in order to be able to generate that model that we're going to then use to run through that secondary process that I mentioned. And then we'll do some, what I like to call some window shopping. And then eventually get to that model output here. So a pretty simple process. However, you'll be able to see that there are going to be a couple of things that we do need to keep in mind as we're going through that. And we'll go ahead and call that out as we get to that sort of end area here. So having said that, absolutely go ahead and jump into things. So again, we're starting off with the preparation side of things. So clicking on the very aptly named preparation tab, I'll go ahead and first drag in to the view a select tool. And what this will allow me to do is we're going to keep it super simple today. We're going to say that we have a couple of superfluous fields here that we don't necessarily need. So those will be described by, for example, education and residential, right? Notice that we have string fields, but we already have a much more optimized numeric field that sort of states the same information. So we'll go ahead and deselect those, education and residential, right? Just as a best practice, always running our workflow, just to make sure that it actually does run. And we can see that in the before and after. I'll go ahead and zoom in here at the very bottom. The input, notice we have the education residential, right? Output, no longer including that. We're sort of removing those superfluous fields, those fields we don't necessarily need. And then let's say, for example, for our is approvable column, right, the star of our show, the column that we actually care about, to be able to derive some actionable information, right? Let's say that it's currently in the wrong data type. We can absolutely go ahead and change that to, for example, let's say string. We can absolutely go ahead and run that. Make sure we don't get any errors. We can continue on with our analysis here. Now, the data preparation stage of things, right? That could range from being super simple, like what you guys saw here, or you could leverage all of the other fields or tools in our preparation tab in order to accomplish the various needs that you have. So for example, you need to generate new rows. Maybe you need to bake in some business logic through the use of the formula tool, or maybe pare down your data using the filter tool, right? Generally, if it's something that you guys need to do during your process, right, Alteryx most likely has you covered on that front. I almost likened it to I don't know if anybody remembers the old iPhone. Whenever it first came out and the App Store just came out, everybody sort of said that tagline, there's probably an app for it. Generally with Alteryx, I like to think of it that way. If you need to do something, generally there's going to be a tool for that. Having said that, we do need to also segment our data into various sampling ranges here. So because we're going to be using our predictive modeling tools, we do need to segment our data into various components in order to be able to allow Alteryx to more effectively run through and parse our data. So we can absolutely do so by segmenting out using the sampling tool. In this case, we're going to be utilizing the, let's see here, where is our create samples tool. And we can see based off of the description, right, it's going to split our data stream into 2 or 3 random samples. So this is going to be completely random. The random is going to help us to generate and to determine our statistical model here and be able to output it here utilizing those statistical tools. So I'll go ahead and drag that into the view as well. Now, there are going to be a couple of configuration options that we can absolutely run through. Now, we do have 3 outputs. Again, there's going to be the evaluation, the validation, as well as the holdout. Valuation, simply going to be the output that allows us to run that through our predictive modeling tools. Validation, just like the name suggests, allows us to create a segment of our data in order to validate or to be able to test our model. And then the holdout is just going to help us to prevent some overfitting based off of making sure that our model doesn't necessarily have too much information. We still want it to be as general as possible in order to be able to output some kind of statistical model here of value. So in this case, again, keeping it super high level, we're going to simply change that to 90% of our sample of our data is going to be to generate our predictive model, and 10%, we're just going to utilize that to validate our data here. So we'll go ahead and run that guy. Absolutely see for our evaluation or our E output, notice that we have 1,800 records. And for our V, we have 200 records. And I'm willing to bet that 200 records, 10%, 1,800, it's going to be 90% of our data here. Now, with that out of the way, we're actually pretty much ready to run this data through our predictive analytics tools. So I'll go ahead and go to the predictive tab. And this is where I sort of mentioned the window shopping component, right? For those of us, right, the overall intent of this specific session isn't necessarily to get a degree in statistics or a degree in predictive modeling or what have you. But for those of us who have never necessarily used these tools or this type of analysis outside of Alteryx, right? You can absolutely utilize this as a method to like sort of wet the palate, right? You guys get interested in these various tools, to be able to then seek out additional or higher level knowledge on these tools. And for those of us who actually currently utilize these types of analysis in their day-to-day, absolutely you can utilize this as a time to be able to actually get familiar and take a look at all the various tools that you have available within Alteryx to bolster, to provide additional value to your current analytics stack. Having said that, we'll go ahead and use the decision tree tool. I love using this tool because essentially if we take a look at the name or the sort of tagline here, right, it'll create a model that essentially uses if-then rules. And I love this specific description here. For example, if you wanted to build an animal species classifier, right, it's going to take in all of the information. Let's say a parameter was number of legs, right? If the number of legs was 0, then Alteryx would crawl through that data and essentially say, hey, it's probably like a fish or some kind of sea animal or a snake. So it's taking all of these various parameters here and it'll output some kind of statistical model to determine whether or not it should be classified in various different data streams or describers here. So in this case, I like to liken that to, in this case, we do want to be able to determine whether or not an individual should be approved for a credit card. But at the end of the day, right, this doesn't necessarily need to be a process that's completely focused on determining whether or not an individual should be approved for a credit card or not. Right? Those parameters could be literally anything. If you wanted to say based off of the last 6 months of stock market data or last couple months of potential client data, right? Maybe we should include this client in our portfolio. Maybe we shouldn't include, right? At the end of the day, we're just attempting to create some kind of decision-making analytic process here. So I'll go ahead and for our target variable, again, we're focusing on the start of our show, is approvable. And for our predictor variables, we'll go ahead and select everything. We want everything to be defined or to be utilized to determine whether or not we are going to approve or deny an individual here. So clicking on run, of course, we'll go ahead and let this run through here for us. Now, as you guys will notice, whenever I run this workflow, right? Whereas before the workflow was finishing, you know, snap finger, just like that, it does take a bit of time for the predictive modeling tools to run through. However, the overall intent of this process isn't necessarily to run this every single time we need to make a decision, but rather to output a specific model to then be able to reuse multiple times. Now, there are going to be a couple of things to take a look at here. So we were successfully able to generate a model of our data, be able to utilize that here. But before we actually get into that, make sure that we cover all of our bases here, dot our I's and cross our T's. And if we take a look, notice that there are going to be a couple of outputs here, right? We have an O, R, and I, right? The O is going to be our model output. That's going to be the thing that we're going to utilize here. However, we do have an R and an I. So the R is going to be sort of a report, a static text report that gives us various statistics regarding our information. Maybe super useful to output this and send it off to your resident statistician, be able to make sure that we're doing good stats, not bad stats. But we also have, for those of us that are more visually focused, an ability to be able to take a look at an interactive report here. Now we're gonna go ahead and save this interactive portion for later. As Megan mentioned earlier, we do have the ability to output to those various end stage reporting tools such as Tableau, Click, Power BI. So we'll take a look at that later. But let's say for example, for those of us who maybe perhaps have never utilized predictive modeling or predictive analytics before, we don't necessarily know which tool to use. So we can absolutely go ahead and do some, what I like to call quote unquote, air quotes here, some window shopping. So let's say that I know the decision tree is very good for some really high level, just shotgun approach. You know, I want to use all of these predictor variables and I want to get a very generalized high level model here for us to be able to use in the future. But let's say that, for example, I want to also be able to test to see, you know, the accuracy of these various tools. I don't necessarily know which tool to use. So what I'll go ahead and do is, you know, you could absolutely go down the line if you wanted to just set up all of these various models here. But in this case, we'll just go ahead and keep it simple and use this single tool. Now, if I go ahead and select is approvable, do the same exact thing with our predictor variables as well. I do want to take a moment here just to call out the customize option. This is not something we're going to get into today, but you do have the option to customize these models using a variety of user-specific inputs here. Now, having said that, we'll go ahead and run this guy. And now we've sort of been able to drag in all of these predictive tools, but it really poses the question, we have various models to be able to make decisions, but which model here will give us, you know, the best decisions that we want? And that's where we can get into the model comparison side of things, right? This box sort of highlighted in purple. And absolutely go ahead and combine these data streams using the union tool, right? Connect these up. So we're going to connect both of these model outputs here up to the model comparison area, utilizing our union tool. And then from here, we're going to go back to the predictive area. And we can actually utilize a tool called the model comparison tool. So quite literally, it's just going to be a tool that allows us to compare multiple models worth of information. And that's where we get to utilize the validation stream here. Right? So if I go ahead and connect the validation data up, right, notice we have a couple of areas. Ooh, looks like Alteryx needs some coffee here. Absolutely go ahead and run this guy. And we can see what the outputs are going to look like here. So as we're waiting for this to run, this is going to be sort of a, if you know exactly what you want, you know exactly which predictive modeling tool that you want to utilize. Absolutely, you can skip this process. However, I'm going to this from the point of view of maybe perhaps this is my first foray or first time I've utilized these tools. I don't necessarily know which output I want. And that's going to be pretty much very accurately described by, in this case, the accuracy column, right? We can see, for example, in this case, go ahead and highlight the decision tree. Maybe even though it's accurate to about 0.90%, 91% of the time, notice that we also get to see our logistic regression tool is, you know, a bit more accurate by a factor of 4% here. So maybe we do want to go with a logistic regression tool. Maybe it is going to serve our needs a bit better. And in fact, if we actually go ahead and click on the tool itself, notice that the sort of description here For example, logistic regression can be used to predict the probability that a loan applicant will pay back the loan, which absolutely, that sounds pretty close to what we need for our credit application data set. So zooming out, right, that's going to be sort of the end point for our model comparison. We can then say, hey, I'm going to decide on using the logistic regression tool. So we're going to go ahead and output that as its own file here. Now, again, the intent is not to have to run this every single time you want to utilize this type of analysis here. So we'll go ahead and just output this as, for example, in this case, let's do something like, I believe there may be a, you can go ahead and just replace that logistic regression model data set here. Absolutely. Just to show you guys, there's nothing hidden up my sleeve. We're absolutely going to go ahead and run this over in real time. And going back to that comment here, we're not going to go ahead and run this every single time we need to get to this analysis, right? You could absolutely use Alteryx promote here to be able to promote these statistical models to the cloud or to some kind of a server-based environment, or you could just save this on some file hosting or file shared location here, right? So imagine if you're, working with millions of records rather than just, in this case, 2,000 records. As you can imagine, this probably would take a long time. So the intent is not to run this every single time here. But once we've had that process sort of buttoned down, we've ran everything, we've gotten this model output, we can then move over to the predictive batch, again, air quotes, scoring area. And this is going to allow us to be able to determine based off of that original model and based off of this new information, right? Notice that this data set does not include the is approvable column, right? These are going to be fresh new applicants that we have not necessarily crawled through their data and be able to determine whether or not they should be approved or denied. We're going to essentially let Alteryx handle everything, right? Potentially seeing some time saves here. So first things first, absolutely we'll go ahead and run that workflow. And then we can also input that regressional model that we just created here. I'll go ahead and add that in. Run this workflow, right? It's been loaded into our data set. Now, this on its own, objects, let's see, around like 2 million bytes, right? That's nice information, but it's not actually useful. So we do need to run this through our predictive modeling tools here. So what we'll go ahead and do is we'll now drag in the model scoring tool. So that'll look a bit like this score tool here. It'll be able to take in that model that we've just generated. Ooh, move that out of the way. And be able to take in the data set that we have as well. So connecting that to the D or data green input or caret, as I like to call it. Connecting the model to the M or white M caret here or inputs. And then we can go ahead and run this guy. And as we're running this, right, what we'll see is we'll absolutely be able to check to see that there are going to be a couple of additional columns here that are going to be added as well. Now, we can also go ahead and drag in a select tool. Let's say that if I take a look, hey, education residential, those are those fields that I realized I didn't necessarily need. We can absolutely go ahead and make some edits here, maybe perhaps include or paste in a tool here. So, it's not set in stone. We can absolutely always remove some fields as we determine here. And I can absolutely go ahead and run that again. Now, essentially what we'll see here at this point, we could probably start to make some decisions, right? So if I go ahead and click on the output here, notice I have a score 0, score 1. We can go ahead and safely ignore score 0. That's essentially going to be the probability that we would deny this individual a credit card based off of their application. We do want to specifically focus on score 1, which is the likelihood or the probability that an individual would have been approved for their credit card based off of their portfolio or based off of their profile here. Again, ranging across all of these various indicators or parameters. Now, again, at this point, honestly, we could just end right here and we could say, we could take this off to the races, right? This first individual, this first record, 99%, we can safely assume that we would probably approve this individual. However, we can go ahead a step further, maybe perhaps add some Alteryx or some visual reporting flair here, as we'll see. Do some, maybe perhaps data prep, as we saw before. So I'll go ahead and drag in a select tool. Select tool is sort of being my best friend here, we can absolutely go ahead and deselect score underscore 0, right? The likelihood that we would deny that individual, and we can just call score 1, likelihood that we would approve that individual for a credit card. We'll call that risk score here for our purposes. Now, there are going to be a couple of ways we can output this out, but before we get into that, let's add some business logic here, make it a bit easier for the individual to take a look at our data. So I'll go ahead and on the risk score column, let's say that I want to make this a bit easier to read by multiplying that by 100, make it look a bit like an actual percentage here. And then we can go ahead and get into the report generation. Now the report generation, as Megan mentioned, we can choose from a wide variety of various reporting tools. Basically, any reporting tool that's under the sun, we can absolutely utilize that as an output. But let's go ahead and take a look at Alteryx's reporting tools that are baked inside of the tool itself or inside of the software. So in this case, I'll go ahead and add in a table, right? Let's say that we want to just generate a simple PDF table output that we can then email out. We'll say that this looks perfect. We're going to leave it as is. And then we'll go ahead and render that out to a PDF document. So we're going to be taking a look at a PDF document here, clicking on run. Let Alteryx chug through this information. And we can see here that directly from the tool itself, we notice it looks suspiciously like a hyperlink for our render output here for our messages. If I go ahead and actually click on that, notice, Alteryx sort of opened it up on the other side of the screen here. That's okay. We'll go ahead and move that over. Move this guy over, right? Notice that we do get a nice PDF output as we were able to see here. And we're going to see here on the far left all the various risk scores. So if we were an individual that was generating this for let's say a coworker or a colleague who actually makes the decision here, we can then safely send this off, maybe perhaps using the email tool, or save this off in a specific or a specified location. Now, having said that, we could also utilize, in this case, I'm going to show you guys Tableau as that end stage reporting tool. Now, again, you have access to a bunch of different connectors here. If I go to the connectors tab, notice that there's Amazon S3, there's publish to Power BI if you're using Power BI, publish to Tableau server, right? You have a bunch of different options here. In fact, even the ones that I'm showing you guys right now aren't even going to be, the whole animal here, the whole list of tools. You have definitely a bunch more that I'm not necessarily showing you guys. However, in this case, I'll go ahead and specify right out of the box. We're going to say, just output it to a hyper data extract. We'll go ahead and build everything ourselves. So I'll go ahead and say credits training data, just to show you guys, again, nothing hidden up my sleeves. We'll go ahead and create a new data extract here. So call it new, click on save. We'll go ahead and run this guy a final time, and then we can jump outside of Alteryx into Tableau and start to absolutely do some very light work here. And we can absolutely, even from within Alteryx here, I don't even need to go and find that file. I can just say, hey, I just want to go ahead and directly jump into Tableau. Absolutely go ahead and left click that. And what we'll see here is Alteryx will absolutely automatically open up for us an instance of Tableau here. So we'll give Tableau some time. Looks like Tableau had a long morning, maybe need some extra coffee here. There we go. So we see that we've connected automatically to that credit training data new extract. Here we have all of our information. You can absolutely go to sheet 1, and I won't necessarily build out everything for for us right now. But if we wanted to, we could absolutely say, for example, with our debt to for our various education levels, right? We could say that, let's go ahead and convert that over to a dimension here. Education levels, right? We have 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5, right? We ranging from no high school education all the way up until maybe perhaps having like a PhD or something like that. We can go ahead and add in to our average risk scores. Let's be a bit fancy here today. Typing in average and generating a bar chart here. Show our mark labels, and we can see absolutely maybe perhaps it's sort of, we'll say education level 4, master's degree, 93% chance. However, it does drop off once we get into the PhD area. And if an individual only has a high school degree or high school level of knowledge, we've on average only approved those individuals 87% of the time, or that likelihood here. Now, this is going to be broad strokes of what you guys could absolutely do inside of Tableau. I wouldn't necessarily say that this is the only thing that you can do. But at that point, your use case and your imagination would be what determines how you utilize the Tableau software or your end stage reporting tool. Now, don't want to get away too much to the star of our show, which is of course Alteryx and its ability to actually generate this data, right? But at the end of the day, that is going to be sort of all I have to show you guys for today. And that doesn't necessarily mean that this is all the information that you guys need in order to create some effective analysis, but it should set the stage here for you to be able to pursue some additional pieces of knowledge. So with that, I'll go ahead and open up the floor back to Quinn and Megan. Hopefully you guys got some value out of today's session. And then I think we can also go ahead and open up the floor to you guys as well for some Q&A here sort of at the end. So go ahead and hop back onto mute and let Quinn and Megan sort of take it away here.
Thanks, Andrew.
Thanks, Andrew. Sorry, go ahead.
Nope, just going to say if anyone has any questions regarding what's been discussed today, any areas, we're happy to go over that. And if you are interested in a demonstration or trial keys, etc., feel free to reach out to myself or the data meeting team. We can definitely get you started and connected and in the right direction. So if there's any questions, feel free to enter that in the Q&A or chat. And Quinn, do you have additional information?
No, but I will, I'm actually going to re-present and just put up our contact information. And then, Dimitri, I just saw your question. Yes, this recording can be distributed. And it does look like we have a specific question as well. I think the first question is, how is any particular batch managed in an enterprise environment? How does one reuse components like a user-defined formula, for example? Sure. Andrew, you want to take that?
Yeah, so that's a perfect. Perfect question here. Thanks for asking, anonymous attendee. The enterprise environment, really, whenever you start to want to scale this out, either on the data set side or on the user collaboration side, you really want to make sure that you sort of focus on that component. So that'll be sort of handled by the Alteryx server environment, Alteryx gallery. So at the very minimum, if you wanted to share these workflows, right? If I wanted to be able to share this travel knowledge, all of this information to, for example, a colleague who has to do the same exact thing, instead of making this a process where I then have to email this out to that individual, which is something that you could absolutely do, right? I could, for example, if you wanted access to this workflow, I could send this out to you, and you could absolutely, if you had access to the input data files, run this workflow. But once you start to get into the sort of enterprise environments where you have to manage, thousands of users, or even to the extent of like tens of hundreds of users, you can publish these workflows to the server environment, give access to everyone who requires access to this workflow very simply and easily through it's almost like a web service where you log onto some kind of URL and you'll be able to have access to this workflow itself. Now, specifically on the model scoring and the statistical model side of things, Alteryx has a separate offering called Alteryx Promote, which allows you to sort of house these statistical models because as we saw that, I was outputting that as a physical file. And if, in fact, we can actually go ahead and go to the model scoring area. Notice that there is the option for an Alteryx Promote model. So you can absolutely go ahead and leverage a server environment to be able to house these. You could also use a local model. So if you wanted to be able to reuse these components, going back to your specific question, you can absolutely go ahead and email this out to an individual if you wanted to. But once you get into that enterprise level, right, when you're not working with just a team of like 1 to 3 individuals who have access to Alteryx Developer, once you're starting to increase that out, that would be then where we would make the recommendation to switch over to the server side of things to sort of be able to share those pieces of analysis. So kind of went a bit overboard with that answer there, but hopefully that sort of answered your question and sort of answered any other related questions regarding that. But having said that, definitely a good question there. Cool. Any other questions?
And this recording will be distributed after the meeting. So you can rewatch this or you can send this out to the additional team. I think that's all the questions right now. Just wanted to make sure. Well, Alteryx and Data Meaning, thanks everyone for attending the session today. Again, a recording will be sent out, and if there's any questions, feel free to respond to us, and we look forward to talking to everyone soon.
Have a great day, everybody.
So thanks, guys. Have a great day.
Thanks, guys. Bye.
Thanks, everyone. Bye-bye.